I won't lend you money. You'll be dead in 3 months anyway. My sister Caroline said this to our dying father's face. While he sat in his wheelchair, asking for help with medical bills, she calculated his inheritance on her phone. Dad's hand shook as he tried to explain the Medicare gap, the physical therapy costs piling up. Caroline examined her manicure and shrugged. What's the point of throwing good money after bad? The room went silent, except for Mom's old clock ticking on the mantel. 2 months later, Dad called me from his hospital bed. His voice was different, tired but determined. Adelaide, he whispered. Cut her off. Promise me. I watched Caroline through the glass door, texting her husband about life insurance payouts. She hadn't even said goodbye, just stood there in her expensive coat, waiting for him to stop breathing. The machine started beeping faster. Dad squeezed my hand with whatever strength he had left. Promise me, he said again. I promised. My name is Adelaide, and my father's last gift was teaching me what silence could do. If you believe silence can speak louder than words, subscribe to Revenge with Suzi. It helps me reach more people and keeps me going to bring you more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have done anything differently? I was 2 days old when Oliver and Margaret found me in the foster care system. Not born to them, chosen by them. They were in their 50s, already had 3 biological daughters, but something about the tiny baby abandoned at General Hospital called to them. We saw you and just knew, Dad used to say, smoothing my hair during thunderstorms when I'd crawl into their bed, shaking with fear. The first 15 years felt almost normal if you didn't look too closely. Caroline and her sisters accepted me in that surface-level way families do when they have to. We took Christmas morning photos together, me always positioned slightly to the side, never quite centered. We shared bedrooms and fought over the TV remote and argued about whose turn it was to do dishes. But there was always this invisible line drawn in permanent marker that I couldn't cross. I remember being 8 years old, proudly showing Grandma Helen a drawing I'd made in art class. It was our family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. She looked at it with those pale, judgmental eyes and said, "Why did you draw yourself so big, dear? You're not really part of this." Then she folded it in half and threw it in the trash while I watched. Little comments like that peppered my childhood. She's not really our blood. She doesn't have the family nose. I wonder what her real parents were like. Whispered conversations that stopped the moment I walked into a room, leaving behind only guilty silence and forced smiles. Christmas mornings were the worst. Caroline and her sisters would tear into piles of expensive gifts, designer clothes, electronics, jewelry. I'd get practical things. School supplies, a winter coat from the clearance rack. We have to be more careful with money, Mom would explain quietly, but I could see the shame in her eyes. Caroline would smirk from behind her new laptop, that cold smile I'd learned to recognize as pure contempt. Everything changed when Grandma Helen died. She'd been the family matriarch, the one with the money from Grandpa's construction business, the one who decided who mattered and who didn't. Helen had always looked at me like I was something that had wandered in from the cold and refused to leave. After her funeral, Caroline cornered me in the church parking lot. We were 16 and 17 then. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and her makeup was perfect despite the tears she'd been crying for show. "You know Grandma never put you in her will, right?" she said, adjusting her pearl earrings. "You're not family, not really." Grandma made that very clear in her final instructions. The parking lot was empty except for us and the hearse pulling away. I could smell the funeral flowers still clinging to my clothes, sickly sweet and overwhelming. My throat felt tight, but I didn't cry. I'd learned not to give her that satisfaction. She left specific instructions about bloodlines, Caroline continued, checking her reflection in a car window, about who counts and who doesn't. I noticed how the house felt different after that day. Quieter, colder, like something fundamental had shifted in the distance between us, and there was no going back. High school became a battlefield I didn't understand I was fighting. Caroline had perfected the art of public humiliation disguised as family bonding. She'd introduce me to her friends at school events with that fake sweet voice. "This is Adelaide, my parents' charity project from when they were going through their savior complex phase." Then she'd laugh like it was the most natural thing in the world. And her friends would laugh too, because Caroline was popular and pretty and cruel in ways that impressed teenage girls. The cafeteria was where she did her best work. I'd sit with my small group of quiet friends eating my packed lunch while Caroline held court 3 tables over with the cheerleaders and student council kids. She'd catch my eye across the room and mouth things like orphan or fake sister just loud enough for her table to hear. They'd all turn and stare, giggling behind their hands. I started spending more time alone, watching how family dynamics worked from the outside. During dinner conversations, Caroline would talk over me like I wasn't there. When I'd try to contribute, she'd wait for me to finish and then say, "Anyway," before changing the subject entirely. The message was clear. Your voice doesn't matter here. Dad noticed. He'd defend me in small, quiet ways that Caroline couldn't openly attack. Extra lunch money tucked into my backpack with little notes that said, "Have a good day, sweetheart." Driving me to school when Caroline forgot to give me rides, even though it meant he'd be late for work. Keeping my drawings and report cards magneted to the refrigerator long after Caroline's achievements had covered every other available surface. Mom tried to keep the peace, bless her. She'd pull Caroline aside after particularly cruel comments, but Caroline had turned gaslighting into an Olympic sport. "I was just kidding, Mom. God, can't she take a joke? She's being way too sensitive. It's not my fault she doesn't understand family humor." The worst moment came during my senior year. We were hosting a family barbecue for Dad's birthday, and Caroline's new boyfriend Jake was there. She wanted to impress him, show off her sharp wit and social dominance. The whole extended family was gathered on the back deck. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. Caroline stood up during Dad's birthday toast, wineglass in hand, smile bright as camera flash. "I just want to say how grateful we are for Dad's big heart," she announced to the crowd. "He's always taking in strays. Adelaide's not technically our sister. She's more like a really long-term house guest who just never learned when to leave." Everyone laughed. Even Mom smiled, that uncomfortable smile people wear when they know something's wrong but don't want to cause a scene. Aunt Martha actually clapped. Uncle Paul raised his beer bottle in a mock salute. Dad didn't laugh, though. He just looked at me across that crowded deck, and I saw something crack in his expression. Sadness mixed with rage, like he was watching something precious break in real time and couldn't stop it. I excused myself to use the bathroom and didn't come back to the party. I spent the rest of the evening in my bedroom, listening to the sounds of family celebration drifting up through my floorboards, knowing I'd never really been part of it. That night, I decided to stop trying to fit where I wasn't wanted. I stopped fighting for a place at their table, stopped competing for attention, stopped explaining myself. The silence felt safer than the alternative. Mom died when I was 25. COPD, from cigarettes she couldn't quit despite Dad's begging. It was one of those slow then sudden deaths that gives you months to prepare but still hits like a freight train when it finally happens. Caroline took charge of the funeral with military precision. White lilies instead of Mom's beloved yellow roses. Presbyterian service instead of her Methodist church. Expensive catering instead of church ladies' casseroles. She asked for my input exactly 0 times. When I suggested Mom's favorite hymn, Caroline cut me off. "We've already decided, Adelaide." I offered to help write the obituary since I'd been talking to Mom daily during her illness. "That won't be necessary," Caroline said, not looking up from her checklist. When the obituary ran in the paper, it mentioned Mom's 3 beloved daughters by name. I wasn't listed at all, like I had never existed. Like 25 years of bedtime stories and homework help and mother-daughter shopping trips had been erased with a word processor. The funeral was beautiful, I'll give Caroline that. Perfect attendance, perfect flowers, perfect tears performed for an audience of 200. She'd invited everyone Mom had ever known. Childhood friends, former co-workers, distant relatives, neighbors from 3 houses ago. She stood at the front of the church in a black Chanel suit, accepting condolences like a gracious hostess at a dinner party. I sat in the back row, wearing a dress I'd bought at Target that morning, because no one had told me we were supposed to coordinate our outfits. No one had saved me a seat with the family. No one had included me in the receiving line. When people approached me with confused expressions, "Are you family? I don't think we've met," I'd just nod and say I was a friend. Caroline had introduced everyone except me. The pastor even thanked Margaret's 3 daughters during his eulogy. I was just there, invisible in plain sight, watching my mother's funeral like a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong service. At the reception, I helped serve coffee and stack plates while Caroline's friends surrounded her with hugs and tissues. I emptied ashtrays and wiped down tables while she shared memories and accepted sympathy cards. No one asked me to speak. No one asked me about my memories. No one seemed to notice that one of Margaret's daughters was missing from all the stories. But Dad found me afterward, standing alone by Mom's memorial photo in the church fellowship hall. The room was nearly empty by then, just a few stragglers and the cleaning crew. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. the first physical affection I'd received all day, and whispered, "You were her daughter. Don't let anyone tell you different." I remember thinking that was the first time anyone had said that out loud, that I belonged, that my absence would have mattered. Caroline started showing her true colors after Mom's funeral. With no one left to moderate her cruelty, she'd make comments about how I wasn't really grieving because I wasn't really family. She started calling me the add-on when talking to her sisters. I heard her once, laughing about how I'd been trying so hard to be relevant during funeral planning. The contempt wasn't hidden behind fake smiles anymore. It was served up cold and deliberate, like she'd been waiting years for permission to be openly cruel. Dad's health started failing 3 years ago. Heart attack, then diabetes, then everything cascading, kidneys, circulation, blood pressure. Caroline saw opportunity where I saw tragedy. She started visiting with notebooks and pointed questions about bank accounts. She'd casually mention Dad's mortality. "When you're gone, Dad?" Not if. When. She'd leaf through his mail while he napped, making mental notes about insurance policies and investment statements. She convinced him to add Derek to his checking account for emergencies, even though Dad's hands were still steady enough to write his own checks. The cruelest moment came last January. Dad needed help covering medical bills Medicare wouldn't touch. He asked Caroline for temporary help until his next Social Security payment. She examined her manicure while he explained. Derek lounged in Dad's favorite chair, scrolling his phone. "We can't help you, Dad," Caroline said. "You'll probably be dead in 3 months anyway, what's the point?" The room went quiet except for Mom's anniversary clock ticking. Dad stared at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. I watched hope drain from his eyes. Derek didn't look up from his phone. That night, Dad called me from his bedroom. His voice was different, tired in a way that went deeper than his illness. "Adelaide," he said, "I need to change some things. Legal things. Can you help me find a lawyer who makes house calls?" I drove him to Attorney Morrison's office the next week, helping him navigate his wheelchair through the parking lot and into the building. I waited in the lobby for 2 hours while he spent time revising documents I wasn't allowed to see. When he came out, he looked lighter somehow, not physically. He was still gray and frail, but emotionally unburdened. "It's done," he said as I helped him back into my car. Finally. Caroline kept pushing, though. She'd corner him about life insurance policies, about the deed to the house, about savings accounts she was sure he was hiding from her. She brought Derek over to help with Dad's finances, spreading papers across his kitchen table like vultures picking apart a carcass. They'd sit there making plans for his assets while he was still breathing. Derek would suggest selling the house immediately after the funeral to maximize market value. Caroline would nod along, taking notes in a little leather planner she'd bought specifically for estate planning. Dad started asking me to stay during their visits. He'd hold my hand while they talked over him about funeral arrangements and asset distribution, like he needed to remember he wasn't alone, that someone in that room actually loved him, not just his bank balance. "You're the only one who visits because you want to see me," he told me one afternoon after Caroline and Derek had left. "Not because you're waiting for me to die." Dad died on Father's Day. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. I'd been staying with him for the last 2 weeks, sleeping on his living room couch, helping with medications 4 times a day, making sure he wasn't scared or alone during the long, quiet hours between dawn and dusk. The hospice nurse came twice daily, but the rest of the time it was just us, watching old westerns on television, playing cards when his hands were steady enough, talking about Mom and better times. Caroline showed up exactly twice during those 14 days. Once to rifle through his bedroom dresser looking for his checkbook. Once to take photos of his jewelry with her phone. For insurance purposes, she claimed. She never stayed longer than 20 minutes. Never sat beside his bed. Never held his hand or asked about his pain or brought him anything to eat. She'd sweep in with her expensive perfume and designer handbags, conduct her business, and leave behind only the lingering scent of Chanel and disappointment. The night before Dad died, he was lucid in a way he hadn't been for days. The morphine hadn't kicked in yet, and his eyes were clear and focused. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength and said, "Adelaide, you've been the best daughter I could have asked for. Don't let them make you feel like you don't belong anywhere. You belong to me and your mother. That's what matters." He paused, struggling for breath, then continued, "I've made sure you're taken care of. Don't let Caroline bully you about it. You earned every bit of what's coming to you." He died at sunrise, holding my hand while cardinals sang outside his bedroom window. I called Caroline at 6:47 a.m. to tell her. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. Hello? Caroline, it's Adelaide. Dad passed away this morning. Silence. Then, when exactly? And did he say anything about, important documents? Not, how did he go? Or was he in pain? Her first question was about paperwork. I hung up without answering. I planned the funeral entirely alone, called Ferguson Funeral Home and arranged for pickup of the body. Selected a casket from their mid-range options because Dad had been practical about money even in death. Wrote the obituary myself, making sure to include every organization he'd belonged to, every person he'd touched, every year of his full, generous life. Caroline was too grief-stricken to help with details, but she found energy to argue about the service length because it conflicted with her family's vacation to Myrtle Beach. She also had opinions about the flower arrangements. Too expensive, she claimed, though I was paying for everything myself. The funeral cost $8,000. The burial plot was another $3,000. The headstone, the flowers, the reception at the church. It all added up to more money than I had in my savings account. I put it on credit cards, borrowed against my 401k, asked for an advance on my next paycheck. Caroline promised to reimburse me for half the expenses. Family should share these burdens, she said, standing in the funeral home lobby with her arms crossed. Send me the receipts and we'll settle up. I never saw a cent. 3 days after we buried Dad next to Mom in Greenwood Cemetery, Caroline's husband Derek showed up at my apartment. Not to check on me, not to offer condolences or share memories, to collect money Dad had supposedly borrowed from them over the years. He stood in my doorway with a handwritten list of expenses. Gas money for doctor visits, $200. Groceries we brought him, $150. The wheelchair ramp Derek built, $400. That adds up to $750, and Caroline thinks you should handle his debts. I knew Dad had never borrowed a penny from them. He'd been too proud to ask and too wise to owe them anything. But I was exhausted from grief and funeral planning and the crushing weight of handling everything alone. I paid Derek anyway. Handed over $750 in cash just to make him leave my doorstep. I was too tired to fight, too heartbroken to argue, too empty to care about money when my father was 3 days in the ground. That's when I finally understood with crystal clarity. They'd never seen me as family. They'd seen me as a service, a free caregiver, a convenient scapegoat, a wallet they could raid whenever they needed quick cash. I was the one who'd made sure Dad took his medications, the one who'd driven him to doctor appointments and sat in waiting rooms, the one who'd organized his pills and paid his bills and made sure he wasn't alone on the day he died. But to them, I was still just the add-on, the charity case who should be grateful for scraps. 2 weeks later, Attorney Morrison called. Dad's will reading was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Caroline and her sisters would be there, of course. I was invited too, though Caroline had made it abundantly clear she didn't expect me to inherit anything significant. He probably left you some jewelry or something sentimental, she'd said with that condescending sweetness she used when she wanted to sound generous. Keepsake stuff. Maybe his watch or some old photos. The real assets will need to be split among actual family members. She'd already started making plans, selling the house quickly to avoid maintenance costs, liquidating his savings accounts to keep things simple, dividing his life insurance policy 3 ways between the real daughters. I sat in Morrison's wood-paneled office that Thursday, watching Caroline fidget with anticipation. She'd dressed up for the occasion. Black pantsuit, pearl earrings, the same professional look she wore to PTA meetings and charity luncheons. Derek sat beside her in his only good suit, the one he'd worn to our father's funeral. Caroline's sisters flanked them like backup singers, all styled hair and expectant expressions. They'd brought their husbands too, turning Dad's will reading into a family reunion, minus any actual grief. Morrison cleared his throat and began reading from the official document. Small bequests first, Mom's jewelry to Sister Jennifer, Dad's tool collection to Derek, the antique dining room set to Sister Patricia. Caroline kept checking her Rolex, impatient to get to the real money. And now for the primary estate, Morrison announced, adjusting his reading glasses. Caroline sat up straighter. Derek pulled out his phone, probably to open the calculator app. The sisters leaned forward like they were watching the lottery drawing. The house at 412 Maple Street, with all contents therein. The savings account at First National Bank. The checking account at Community Credit Union. The life insurance policy through Northwestern Mutual. The investment portfolio managed by Henderson Financial. All retirement accounts, certificates of deposit, and any other assets not specifically mentioned above. He paused for effect, though I don't think he meant to be dramatic. All of the above, in their entirety, are left to Adelaide Morrison, with the following note from the deceased. Adelaide was the daughter who loved me, not my money. She was there when it mattered. She deserves everything I have to give, and I hope it helps her build the life she's earned. The silence in that room was so complete I could hear the air conditioning cycling on in the hallway. Caroline's face went through about 17 different expressions in 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, calculation, rage. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Derek's phone slipped from his hands and clattered on the hardwood floor. Jennifer made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Patricia just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "There must be a mistake," Caroline said, her voice tight and controlled. She's not even... She stopped herself before saying what we all knew she was thinking. Morrison looked at her over his reading glasses with the patience of a man who'd been handling difficult families for 30 years. Mr. Oliver was very specific about his intentions, Mrs. Caroline. He revised this will 6 months ago and confirmed his choices multiple times. He also left sealed letters for each of you, which I'm instructed to distribute now. He handed out white envelopes with our names written in Dad's careful handwriting. Caroline tore hers open immediately, scanning the contents with growing fury. I tucked mine into my purse unopened. "This is insane," Caroline said. Standing up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "We'll contest this." She manipulated him. She probably isolated him from his real family and filled his head with lies. "You're welcome to pursue legal action," Morrison replied calmly. However, I should mention that Mr. Oliver anticipated this possibility. He included a no-contest clause in his will. Anyone who challenges the document will forfeit their specific bequests and receive nothing. Caroline's inheritance was Mom's engagement ring and Dad's collection of vintage pocket watches. Probably worth $10,000 total. She could risk losing it all for a chance to fight me in court, or she could take what she'd been given and walk away. She chose rage. 40 years, she hissed, pointing at me across Morrison's desk. 40 years I've been his daughter, and you waltz in here and steal everything because you played nursemaid for a few months? Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since we'd arrived, it's been 35 years, and I didn't steal anything. I was just there. I signed the papers, shook Morrison's hand, and walked out of that office with everything my father had worked for his entire life. Caroline followed me into the parking lot, screaming about blood relatives and family loyalty and legal challenges. Her sisters trailed behind, some trying to calm her down, others adding their own voices to the chaos. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away while she was still yelling. It's been 8 months since that afternoon in Morrison's office. 8 months of Caroline trying every manipulation tactic in her considerable arsenal to get me to share what Dad left me. She started with angry phone calls. 15 voicemails the first day, each one progressively more unhinged. "This is theft. Dad would be ashamed of you. Real family doesn't abandon real family." I listened to exactly one of them before deleting the rest. Then came the guilt trips. Text messages about how family forgives, and Dad would want us to work together. She sent me photos from our childhood, Christmas mornings, family vacations, birthday parties, like those memories could erase decades of cruelty. When emotional manipulation failed, she tried financial negotiation. She'd graciously accept half the inheritance if I'd do the right thing. When I didn't respond, she lowered her demand to a third, then a fourth. Then she just wanted the house. I blocked her number after the 30-second message. She showed up at my apartment twice. The first time, she brought crocodile tears and a rehearsed apology. She stood on my doorstep in a black dress that was probably supposed to look like morning clothes, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. "Adelaide, I know we've had our differences, but we're still family. Dad wouldn't want us fighting like this. We can work this out. Sisters should stick together, especially now that we're both orphans." I watched her through the peephole, marveling at her performance. She'd always been good at crying on command. I remembered her using the same talent to get out of trouble in high school. I didn't open the door. The second time, she brought Derek and demands instead of tears. They stood on my porch like debt collectors, Derek looming behind Caroline's shoulder while she listed all the reasons I should voluntarily redistribute Dad's inheritance. "You know this isn't what he really wanted," she said through the door when she realized I wasn't going to let them in. "He was sick and confused, and you took advantage of an old man. That's elder abuse, Adelaide. We could have you arrested." I still didn't open the door. I just called the police and reported harassment. They left before the squad car arrived. Her sisters called too, trying to mediate. "Caroline's really sorry about how she treated you growing up," Jennifer said during a 40-minute phone call I should have ended after 5 minutes. She's been doing a lot of soul-searching since Dad died. She realizes she made mistakes. She's willing to forgive and move forward if you are, Patricia added during her own guilt trip session. Family is all we have left now. You're being too harsh. Dad would want us to be united. I told them what Dad had told me in his final moments. Cut her off. That seemed to end the mediation attempts. I used part of Dad's inheritance to hire a lawyer, not Morrison, but a younger attorney who specialized in estate protection. She sent Caroline's legal team a very clear message. Any further contact would be considered harassment, and any attempt to contest the will would result in them losing their small bequests entirely. The letters stopped. The phone calls stopped. The surprise visits stopped. I sold Dad's house and moved across the country. New Mexico, where the air is dry and clear and I can see mountains from my kitchen window. I kept his photo albums and Mom's recipe box and the pocket watch he'd given me for my high school graduation. Everything else went to charity or got sold with the house. Caroline will never know where any of it went, and that's exactly how I want it. Sometimes, late at night when the desert is quiet except for coyotes singing in the distance, I think about those last words Dad whispered in the hospital. Cut her off, promise me. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of love. He'd spent 35 years watching Caroline treat me like something she'd scraped off her shoe. He'd seen the casual cruelty, the deliberate exclusion, the way she'd made sure I never forgot I was different. His final gift wasn't just the money or the house or the insurance policies. It was permission to stop trying to belong where I wasn't wanted. Permission to choose my own family. Permission to walk away from people who'd never valued me anyway. I read his letter on the anniversary of his death. He'd written it in his careful handwriting, probably sitting at his kitchen table with Mom's good pen. Dear Adelaide, if you're reading this, then you know you were always my real daughter. Not because of blood or law or obligation, but because of choice. Every day, you chose to love me, even when others made that choice difficult. I'm choosing to love you back the only way I know how. Build a good life, sweetheart. You've earned it. Love, Dad. Caroline thought quiet meant weak. She learned the difference when it was too late to matter. I still have the silence Dad gave me, and it's been more than enough.